Welcome everybody to my Mog House, but also to a Should You Pull video for Jayden, the birthday boy. Oh wait, no, sorry, he's getting married. That's what's happening. So he's coming to War of the Visions this week, and we're gonna talk about his kits, his stats. We'll do some comparisons, talk about the equipment that you can farm for him, and even take a sneak peek at the Japanese meta. And hopefully with all this information, you'll know whether or not you actually want to pull for Jayden come this Wednesday. For your information, Jayden is a spear-wielding magic-based attacker with the ability to lower his enemies' hate to 0 and also lower their slash attack penetration. And you pair that with high slash resistance and a big physical HP barrier, and you have a very powerful attacker with decent survivability. So let's break down exactly what makes Jayden tick by taking a look at the scouting report. Let's talk about Jayden's damage, which should be pretty solid based on his stats, but also because he has many of the tools that a 100 cost attacker needs. His limit burst will lower pierce resistance by 37%, which is key because he does not have any pierce penetration. However, to mitigate that lack of penetration, he also has the magic attack type on his subjobs. But I also wanted to mention that the majority of the units that have been released recently are weak to pierce attacks, including Raf and Dialdo. Jayden has access to multiple chaining skills to increase his damage, and his barrier break has terrific range as it is an arcing shot, meaning that he will be able to break barriers easily. Jayden's survivability looks great on paper, but it is skewed towards the physical type attacks. He has a 10% resistance to all elements, and his farmable spear gives him a further 10% to the wind, light, and dark resistances. He also has a 50% debuff weakening effect on his first TP skill. However, it's his blessing of the shield TP skill, the second one, that gives himself allies and his allies 25% single target resistance, 25% slash resistance, and a 10,000 physical HP barrier that is so impressive. He also has Protect on his Grimoire Keeper subjob, rounding out his durability against physical attackers. His resistances are all solid aside from his weakness to strike and magic attacks, but where he really will shine is against his slash attackers, as his Blessing of the Shield gets upgraded and allows all of his attacks to reduce slash resist penetration by 30%. So if you're able to build high slash resistance with him, and if you pair him with something like Howlet, so you're attacking a wide number of enemies, reducing their slash penetration, then you might have an effective strategy to take on slash attackers. Jayden's utility is decent. He has a barrier break that is very accessible but single target. He has re-raise removal and healing power down on his main job, and counter chance down 100% on his sub kit. He also has a sure hit on his Grimoire Keeper sub, but his accuracy is perfectly passable. It's not super low, but it's also not incredibly high. The final piece of Jayden's utility is his very unique ability to reduce enemies' hate to 0. He can do this with his single target arcing attack that also breaks magic barriers. It's a very neat piece to ignore Raf and Dialdo and allow your team to take out the other party members. It only has 3 uses though, and the range of the skill can be upgraded via his passives, but more on that in just a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about the cons for Jayden, and I have a few up here and I have a few more that I need to talk about as well that I forgot to put in, so I'm sorry about that. But basically no re-raise or courage, those things are pretty important. They do get to come off quite a bit when people don't get killed by the people with the removals for them, so they are important to have. He's also very weak to the magic attack type, both in his resistance, but also the fact that his barrier is physical only. He also needs some help with AP. He does a little bit of help on his kit, but it's not enough, and that is a bit of a concern. Barrier breaks against him are also going to be trouble, and his arcing barrier break skill that he will use only has 3 uses, which does concern me a little bit. I think that you could use all 3 of those uses pretty quickly, if not in Guild Battle 1, then at the beginning of Guild Battle 2. It's also very difficult to upgrade his arcing attacks at the cost of a lot of other stats. So if I show you his passives right now, you'll see that he has 2 passives, one that gives spirit penetration and one that gives elemental resistances up and agility and magic, among other things. They're very good passives that you definitely want to be using, which means that it's very difficult to use his other passive that increases the range of both of his arcing shots, and that makes it really tricky to figure him out. If you know your target is not going to have a high spirit value, then it's easy to sub in the shot upgrades, but for the most part you're going to want the 2 upgrades that increase his stats and not his range. Compared to other 100 cost units, I feel that Jayden was shorted on a few stats. In particular, his agility, which looks fine in the image, is actually boosted by his passive, and without it, it's pretty low. And because there's a bit of discrepancy in which passives you want to use, it's pretty much mandatory that you do want to get that agility passive. Also, his AP stat is a little bit low and his resistances are kind of weaker compared to some other units. Overall, I don't think he's quite as pushed as he could have been, and his stat line it's not bad, but it's just not as good as I think he probably needed. The other thing that I think is kind of odd is that his crit rate is pretty low, but he has a Job 25 skill that will recover HP based on whether or not he crits. And the fact that that skill seems pretty important, it's weird that they didn't give him a higher dexterity stat or a higher innate crit rate. So you will have to supplement that if you want to take advantage of that attack. Taking a look at the equipment for Jayden, his TMR is quite good. It has a 60% magic buff, which is no joke, but even if you don't want to use that, it's a good stat stick because it has that agility on it. For spears, we have a few different options. The farmable spear is the one that I mentioned earlier. It's great in that it gives him some elemental resistances, which is always a very powerful way of mitigating damage. However, we have the Dragon Whisper Spear that is coming out this week. Sorry, Dragon Whisker Spear, not Whisper. That's coming out this week in the Ancient Reliquaries quest, and it is a great contender as it gives a 40% boost to accuracy while providing more magic stat. Sorry, not actually, it's pretty comparable, but it has more pierce attack and it has an AoE resistance debuff. So I would use the Dragon Whisper if you're able to not farm it, but able to acquire it. But still, if you can farm Jayden Spear, you should build a magic version for those specific times where you want the elemental resistance. I think the magic version is better than critical because if you want to go all in into crit, then you'll probably use an accessory that gives you more crit chance. Something like the Thornlet, but also gives you the advantage of reducing agility, seems like a good way to go if you're going to go into an all crit build. Okay, so now it's time to take a look at the JP meta, who have had this unit for a little bit longer than us. Now, this is not going to be as applicable a way to look at units in the future, as the gap is going to be way shorter, but right now it's still pretty accurate. So we can see here that in the top 50 for attack usage, that Jayden is being used, on average 35 times that day, and then he was used, 36 times that day. Whatever it is, they're these lower numbers. Same thing on defense. We're looking at 14 one day, 20 the other day, only 12 times a different day. So he's not being used a super large amount. And when we compare that to other units, it will become quite clear. So if we go ahead and look at Sephiroth, who has been used for a very long time now, he's being used 223 times, where we have on the other side 291 times on defense. So he's being used way more than our Jayden is. Now we can also look at Bradley, who's being used 237 times on that day, and then 196 times on defense. So just more people are still sticking to the Earth teams and the Dark teams than the Ice teams. And we can also take a look at the Bride Alaya, who is coming out very soon as well on Global, who is a very strong unit, and she's being used 391 times on attack and 594 times on defense. So she is seeing an incredible amount of usage, more than both of those other units that we just looked at. And if you want to know what kind of teams that we're talking about here, well, let me filter this real quick by top 50, and we can see that she's being used in lightning teams, she's being used in strike based teams, and there's a lot of different ways that you can actually apply her into a party. So going back to Jayden then, we can actually take a look at who's being used with Jayden. So on offense, we're seeing teams like an all spear team, which would be, oh, sorry, that's on the right side. We can see the all spear team with Glaciella, Dialdo, and Jayden. There's also a few ice teams there. Another interesting team is to see Velis and Jayden, as well as Dialdo, as Dialdo is just a very solid tank. But really what we're seeing here is mostly ice teams, a little bit of spear teams, but for the most part, he's going to be used in mono ice. And the other thing I wanted to show real quick is the overall top 50 meta. So we're going to go ahead here and we'll go for defense teams. We'll put it in the top 50, and for the attack teams, we'll change it to the top 50 as well. And we can see that the units that are being used, Wedding Alaya, like we saw, is way up there. Tanks like Raph, Dialdo, Glaciella are all involved here, and lots of strike units, lots of dark and light units, and now lightning units are all seeing play around here. But what we're not seeing on this graph at all is any sort of Jayden usage. So if you're looking at the JP meta, he is not seeing play there right now. That doesn't doesn't necessarily mean that he couldn't be used to great effect in global, but this is just purely what we're seeing on JP. With all that said, I think that most players should be skipping Jayden unless they are hard into the ice element. I don't think that he's going to disrupt the meta in global, although I do think that he's going to do decent damage considering that almost every single character that's been released recently has negative pierce resistance. The only exceptions to that are Bradley and Sephiroth. Now, of course, those are units that are seeing a huge amount of play. They both have positive pierce resistances, so take from that what you will. I think that ice players are going to get a lot of use out of Jayden. I think that as with many War of the Visions units, he is not bad at all. However, you have to consider that he has these increased rates. It's a good time to get him, but at the end of the day, the accelerated timetable and a new Final Fantasy collab soon to be announced in JP means that I think most players should be skipping Jayden at this time to save up their WOTV. All right, I hope this video was useful for you. If it was, you can let me know down in the comments below and let me know if you're going to be pulling for Jayden or if you are going to be saving. And if you are saving, what for? Otherwise, I'll see you all soon in another video.